Now, we're going to transition now to talk a little bit about enhancing deployment security. And I think, this is really where we get into, um, you know, uh, deployment as a security control point. Right now, here, we want the ability to, at every stage of the deployment process, the ability to evaluate security data against a set of rules or policies, right? Now, the ability to block, I'd mentioned earlier, is sort of controversial, right? Because we tend to talk to a couple different customers who say, "Oh, you know what? I don't want to block. I'm more of a roll forward, sort of scenario. So I just need you to tell me there's a problem, and then we'll spin up another release that will go ahead and fix that. If assuming we didn't catch it prior to the release process." Others are saying, "Look, there are certain events that we want to make sure never ever happen." And so for that, I want to make sure that we can sort of bring an enforcement layer in. And I'm going to deviate from this for just a second from the PowerPoint and actually show you. And this is just an example with our tool, not meant to be a demo, just to show you sort of the concept. So in our tool, we actually break up the rules that we ship with across the source, build, artifact, and deploy swim lanes, right? And then ultimately, our customer is allowed to come in and say, "Hey, here's a rule. Let me get an understanding of what that rule is doing," and then I can actually make a determination as to what a violation is going to do based on this, right? And we add tags so you can sort of understand sort of vertically, sort of what category this rule fits into. But I could very simply either turn the rule off if it's not relevant to my business, or I can choose between, alert and prevent. I can also, for my internal users, I can make a determination, if I'm working with my security folks, what is the severity in a very generic term, right, around these things. Now, teams will also get an opportunity to adjust these things from that perspective, but they'll net, like, let's say as an example, security decides this is going to be a medium criticality. The individual teams could bump that up to higher critical depending on their circumstances. And then when we have the rules in place to do the evaluation, one of the things that we like to sort of highlight here is that ability to block a deployment based on that. So here, we've got an application. We've got the deployment firewall status here where we're showing, hey, we've had 17 block deployments, and then we can actually drill into, if I were to click on one of those things, here's why. Here are the actions that were taken, and here's why these things were blocked, right? So again, it's very, very customizable depending on the way that a company works. But again, we are able to go ahead and help you add that circuit breaker to that thing. And I think it's important to have that option. When you're talking about, sort of security, and you're talking about, hey, we had an issue, or we read about an issue, or we heard about a problem, right? You might want to use this to say, hey, look, I know that there's a CVE in there that's a 0-day. What I want to do as an emergency measure immediately is go in and block any deployments where that CVE or the library that's affected by that CVE is in that stack. So this acts as that perfect circuit breaker, in the event that you want to use it like that. Now, the other thing that I think is important in the practical world is sort of an end-to-end evaluation, right? So here, I want to make sure I've got visibility into the status from a security posture perspective of that application stack. For this, our generic term for it is delivery bill of materials. But I think any tool that you're evaluating, you want to make sure that you have that level of visibility. And so I'll pop out real quick again. This is an example of what we call the delivery bill of materials, or DBOM. And here, we're giving each stage a security score, right? So there are obviously some failures here in the source code management stuff, right? So there's no static code analysis integration detected, right? So that's a huge problem. There's a couple of other failures that we see here, right? It's the same thing with the build stage. It's the same thing with the artifact stage, right? And again, based on sort of how those severities have been configured, that's going to play into our overall scoring. And then ultimately in the deployment phase here, again, we're doing things like, hey, what are the sys benchmarks that aren't being complied with? Where are those failures, right? And then, some of the other pieces, this around FedRAMP or deployment configuration. There are some failures here too. Block containers without request limits, block containers, without request limits, or block containers without ratios, or block containers that don't have a read-only operating system. So those types of things we're going to automatically evaluate for you, and you're going to get an end-to-end view of this. And I think this is really, I say this in the context of OpsMX, but any ASPM tool, you really want to hold them to that bar, because you really want to be able to see this, and you want the teams that are working on the applications to be able to see these things as well, and ultimately understand sort of where the problems are, right? So I think that's another critical element to this. And again, I categorize that as sort of end-to-end awareness.